After being 2 full seasons removed from their Super Bowl appearance in 2016, the Atlanta Falcons last year were looking to get back on track as being one of the teams not only who in the NFC is gunning for a Super Bowl shot, but really one of the better teams in the league as a whole. 2019 was also a year where the Atlanta Falcons were looking to get back to being one of the more healthy teams and just getting back to being healthy as a whole. After the 2018 season, the Atlanta Falcons saw Deion Jones, Keanu Neal, and Ricardo Allen all miss well over half the season due to various injuries and landing on IR during the season. However, as this list that I'm going to put up on the screen shows, the Atlanta Falcons again went through some of the worst injury trauma that any team really faced last year. And this is just a short list of about 8 or 9 guys. Actually, it's 8 guys who had the worst injuries that the Atlanta Falcons went through. This doesn't show the game that Matt Ryan missed. This doesn't show half the injuries that the Atlanta Falcons went through last year. But you could still see the pure talent that this team was missing. They were missing first-round draft pick Chris Lindstrom for over half the season. Keanu Neal went down with another season-ending injury. And they had other safety and defensive back players who were missing for about half the year, like Desmond Trufant and J.J. Wilcox, who missed the whole entire season as a whole. However, with all of that being said, it is somewhat of a pleasant surprise to see that the Atlanta Falcons still went 7-9 last year. And it's they started 1-7 to start the year last year, and then they ended up winning 6 of their last 8 games. So, it was really just a tale of 2 halves of the season. They had to go through in their first half of the season, losing guys like Keanu Neal, losing guys like Ito Smith, Desmond Trufant, Chris Lindstrom. They went through a terrible first half of the year, and I think after they had their bye week halfway through the season, they were able to put in good work and be able to somewhat salvage a season and be happy going into the next year, knowing that they had many key players, especially on their defensive side of the ball, who missed the entire season or most of the season. The offense as a whole last year was pretty much at the same point that they've been through much of their, prime. Matt Ryan and Julio Jones were still towards the top in terms of their respective QB and wide receiver rankings. And the offense really as a whole, other than not really being able to take care of the ball very well and not being able to, have a consistent offensive line throughout the year, they still were in the top 15 in scoring. They were still 5th in yards, and they had one of the best passing attacks in the NFL, led by Julio Jones. But there still were the problems through, like I said, the first half of the year where they just weren't able to get things rolling offensively, and their whole team kind of struggled because of it. Even though they have a great defense, they have a lot of defensive stars on their defense. The offense is really what makes this team roll. It's what gets this team energized and puts points up on the board, obviously. So when this offense isn't performing at its best, this team as a whole wasn't really doing great last year. Grady Jarrett for the defense last year was probably one of the real bright spots for this defense as a whole. He followed up what was one of the highest contracts any defensive lineman in general has signed in NFL history. And when many people thought maybe he would regress in what his production shows on the box score, he kind of had one of his greatest seasons. He had about 70 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, and 7.5 sacks. And Deion Jones, while he was coming back from an injury that took him out of half of the previous season, he came back and had one of his greatest seasons as well, posting over 100 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and an interception. However, this defense was still missing Keanu Neal, J.J. Wilcox, Jonathan Cyprien, Desmond Trufant. They had 2 young corners in Kendall Sheffield and Isaiah Oliver. There really was a lot going wrong for this defense as a whole. They weren't really able to pressure the quarterback other than Grady Jarrett. Vic Beasley added 8 sacks as well, but he was nowhere near that league-leading whatever. I don't even remember how many sacks he had. He had like 15 or 17 a few years ago. So everything went wrong for this defense that could have went wrong. The offense struggled, they turned the ball over, and the defense really wasn't able to stick up for the offense and keep points off of the board. The team in general as a whole just didn't really have statistically the same type of season that they saw when they went to the Super Bowl a few years ago, and even the year after that when they went to the playoffs. That team statistically was still towards the top of the league in most, if not all, categories, both offensively and defensively. Again, they don't have the best defense, they don't have the best offense, but statistically they're usually towards the top on both sides of the ball. So seeing where they are at this point, I think you would be able to attribute that mostly to the injuries that they saw, like I told you about or showed you in the beginning of the video. Having injuries like that, especially when you're relying on starters like that, guys like Chris Lindstrom and Keanu Neal. The first few games of a season, they're not really a preseason for guys like that, but guys who are starters and star players for a team aren't really playing during the preseason. They're going hard in training camp, but it's not the same as going into the first 4 or 5 games of the actual season. That's where guys really get their tune-up and get into their flow of things. So having the beginning of the season taken away from them, they kind of have to start their preseason as a sort halfway through the season, and they're not up to the same sort of playing ability that they're used to when they're usually at that point in the season. And I think that's what we saw with the Falcons last year, is they had a lot of guys who were inserted back into the lineup halfway through or 3/4 of the way through the season, and they weren't really able to produce at the same type of rate that they usually are. Before I talk about what the offseason did for the Atlanta Falcons, one thing I do want to point out about Julio Jones, just to talk about the pure greatness of this wide receiver, Julio Jones in 2019 had 1,394 yards. That's the least amount of yards he's had in about 4 or 5 seasons. So that just goes to show just how great Julio Jones, that a 1,400-yard year is one of his worst seasons as a professional. That's just how great and how much of a Hall of Fame player Julio Jones is. Now, getting into the offseason review for the Atlanta Falcons, they actually had a lot of turnover on both the offensive side and defensive side of the ball. Defensively, they lost star corner Desmond Trufant, who didn't play for most of the season last year. However, in the games that he did play, he almost was playing at an all-pro caliber level, and he showed why he is still a solid number 1 corner in the league, even though he has been a little bit injury-prone over the last couple of years. And they also lost many guys who were key contributors for the defense last year. Vic Beasley led the team in sacks. Adrian Claiborne has been a solid, steady contributor for that defense for many years. And Devondre Campbell was actually the leading tackler for this team. He took his talents to Arizona. So defensively, they lost a few things. They did try to address those things that they lost in the offseason, but I don't know for sure if they're going to be able to fully replace what they lost on the defensive side of the ball. In terms of offense, they did lose a lot there as well. They lost guard and tackle, or they lost guard Wes Schweitzer, who ended up filling in for Chris Lindstrom for a few games last year. I believe he moved to left guard after Chris came back. They lost tackle Ty Sambrailo, who was kind of just a reserve tackle. The 2 biggest players that they lost was Austin Hooper and Devontae Freeman. Austin Hooper was one of the top tight ends last year, probably top 4 or 5. And even though Devontae Freeman was nowhere near where he usually is in terms of his production, he still was a key contributor for the team last year. He had a few games where he still showed where he was able to be effective. They replaced him with Todd Gurley, which is probably an upgrade. But at the same time, Devontae Freeman and Todd Gurley have had the same couple issues over the past couple of years where they've been a little bit injury prone. We don't really know what we're getting from either player, but Todd Gurley definitely is a little bit of an upgrade over Devontae Freeman. The draft didn't really bring a lot for the Falcons. They only had 6 picks in total. They drafted cornerback A.J. Terrell out of Clemson, who I think there were better corners, there were better players in general on the board still at the time. But if they feel like he is able to come in and contribute well with the corners that they already have, they have a really young cornerback core, including the free agent signing of Darqueze Dennard. They have 4 guys who are 27 or younger, 26 probably or younger actually, between Darqueze Dennard. They have A.J. Terrell now. They had Isaiah Oliver and Kendall Sheffield last year. So they have a really young corner core, which might be the downfall of the defense again next year, but you never know. That much speed and athleticism might be enough to win them a few games. The worst move that the Atlanta Falcons probably made was trading for Hayden Hurst, and it's not the fact that they traded for Hayden Hurst that was a bad deal. Hayden Hurst is still a solid young tight end who could evolve into a great tight end. However, trading a second-round pick in last year's draft was one of the more talented drafts we've seen in a long, long time. So trading a second-round pick for Hayden Hurst, who was a first-round pick, who never really got going in the Baltimore offense last year, a Baltimore offense that really utilizes tight ends more than anything, I don't know if it was a great move to trade for him for a second-round pick, but at the same time, Hayden Hurst could evolve into a great tight end. I just don't see it really happening anytime soon. The obvious best move that the Atlanta Falcons made in their offseason was signing Dante Fowler Jr. from the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams were at a point last year, you could see it with Todd Gurley when they cut him. They are out of money, and they need to save as much money as possible to try to keep their younger stars like Jared Goff and Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald. So when they ran out of money, Dante Fowler Jr. hit the market, and Atlanta probably made one of the more underrated best moves in free agency in total in signing Fowler Jr. He's a linebacker who can get after the run, or get after the running back and get after the quarterback. He somewhat can play in pass coverage as well. I mean, he's not one of those guys that you're going to rely on in pass coverage, but he's athletic enough to get in passing lanes and be able to get a couple deflections, maybe get a couple pass breakups, and be a reliable player in that defense. And him and Deion Jones are probably one of the better linebacking duos that we're going to see over the next couple of years. So now talking about what the 2020/2021 season looks like for the Atlanta Falcons. I've said it in the past couple of videos when I'm talking about the Dolphins and the Bears. The problem with coronavirus, it's obviously a problem. There's going to be no fans in many stadiums. There's going to be only a few fans in the other stadiums. However, just looking at the pure football aspect for the Atlanta Falcons, this is one of the weirder teams going into next year because the second half of the season went great for them, even including games where they didn't have Desmond Trufant or Keanu Neal or players like that. So they're going into a year where they ended the year 6-2. They looked like the Super Bowl caliber team that we saw them be in 2016. However, going into this offseason where there's limited player-to-player interaction in terms of, you know, being on the field with each other. I mean, we were supposed to be playing preseason games by now. So it's going to be weird for the Atlanta Falcons going into next year. However, I really could see this team vying for an NFC South division title. They would have to probably win about 11 or 12 games to be able to take that title from the Saints or the Buccaneers with Tom Brady. Even the Carolina Panthers are an improved team from what they were last year, and the Panthers still won 6 or 7 games last year. So the Atlanta Falcons, and I really could see that being their ceiling as a 12-13 win team who takes the NFC South Division title. However, if the injury history that the Falcons have gone through over the past couple of years, and even with guys that they brought in like Todd Gurley or everything that is on their roster right now, I could see this being another bad year for the Atlanta Falcons where they win 5 or 6 games and, you know, they're left thinking, what if we didn't have such an injury-prone team? What if we had a full offseason to fully integrate these new players? It's going to be a boomer bust year for the Atlanta Falcons. I don't think it's going to be in the middle again. I think Dan Quinn, the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, is kind of on the hot seat. A lot of people were calling for him to be fired last year. They kept him. Whether it was a bad move or not, I think it was a great move to keep him just because he's a defensive-minded head coach, and you took, I mean, he lost all of his defensive stars on the defense, so you can't really blame the guy for that. However, this could be a year where the Atlanta Falcons possibly are looking at a rebuild after this year. Matt Ryan's getting up there in age. Julio Jones, we never know, I mean, how much longer he's going to be the best wide receiver in the game. So I really do see it being a boomer bust year. I don't think they're going to go 7-9 or 8-8. I think it's either going to be a 5-6 win team or a 12-13 win team. I don't think it's going to be in the middle. Again, it could, but either way, if they're lower on the win column or if they're in the middle, if they're 8-8 or if they're 5-11, I think Dan Quinn gets fired. If they go 12-4 or they go 13-3, I think Dan Quinn probably gets a contract extension. There's a lot of things that could go right. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. And I really think that this Falcons team, if they put it all together, could honestly be vying for another Super Bowl shot just looking at their two main players on offense. If you just look at Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, they're both, I mean, Julio Jones, in my opinion, is the number 1 receiver in the league. Matt Ryan is a top 5 or 6 quarterback, in my opinion. So just with those two alone, they are going to win 6 or 7 games. It's going to be up to the defense to win those other 5 or 6 to make them a Super Bowl candidate. Alrighty, with all of that being said, that's going to be the video for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit the like button. If you didn't, make sure you hit the dislike button. Any feedback from you at this point is much appreciated. If there's anything that you think I forgot to talk about, make sure you leave a comment down below. I try to get back to all of the comments as possible. And if you like the content that I put out, make sure you hit subscribe. Again, I've said it in the past couple videos. I'm going to try to get one of these off-season and season reviews or previews up for every single team. It's going to be kind of hard. We're coming up on 2 or 3 weeks left before the season starts. I'm only 3 out of 32. But again, if you like the content I put out, make sure you hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.